Hi, I'm Enid and this is Divine Astrology, and today we have CatCox talking with us. Hi.
Hi.
All right, Cat, would you like to tell us how you got into astrology in the first place?
I got started in astrology way back in the 1980s. I took my first class in 1984 with Sue Tompkins. There was a lot of astrology happening in adult education at that time in London.
This afternoon, what are you going to talk about?
This afternoon, I thought as the nights are drawing in, beginning to, and this solstice is a particularly significant solstice, it might be a nice opportunity to look at some of the symbolism around the winter solstice 2012.
Yes.
So that's what we'll be looking at.
You're referring to the Yod or the Mayan prophecies?
Well, referring to the Mayan prophecies, the great alignment, the great cosmic alignment in 2012.
All right. What would you say? Well, astrologically, the Uranus-Pluto square, but the Yod as well, of course.
Well, in terms of the planetary activity at this time, the T square has been extraordinary, I think, and we've been able to track the movement since 2008 and the first opposition between Saturn and Uranus.
Yes.
The first phase of it, being able to track all the extraordinary sort of political developments and economic developments, and then the middle phase, the times of austerity, as the politicians have certainly been terming it, between the square between Saturn and Pluto.
Yes.
Has been another really important period, and of course then the beginning of the Arab Spring as we've moved into the Uranus Pluto square. So I think we are living in phenomenal times at this point, with huge amount of change and a huge amount of uncertainty for people. So I think it is, astrologers have a valuable role to play to be able to speak to these times and be able to talk about the symbolism in a way that might be helpful for people, but I think just carry some of that reassurance that cycles change, things move, and yet there's a constant flow of time. So we're living certainly through turbulent times at this point, but in due course this time will pass.
Are there any things that you think are going to happen over the next few years? Any observations that you have beyond revolution and riots, for example?
Well, I think we've seen an enormous amount of the symbolism played out already in terms of all the economic crises that have been expressed globally, and the economic, and then the political situation in Europe is clearly another aspect of that, and clearly there's yet more to play with the situation in Europe.
There's a huge amount happening in this country in April, more cuts.
And of course, in terms of the Uranus-Pluto square, that is clearly playing out till 2015. So there's clearly still much more to be unfolding in this time. It always struck me as interesting that at the beginning of the economic crisis, 2008, a fair number of economists were saying 2 or 3 years and we'll be out of this, but 1 or 2 voices were suggesting 2015 at that time, and that always struck me as interesting because of that, of course, fits the astrology.
Oh, the Mayan prophecies say the end of the world. What's your interpretation of them?
Well, I think it's not just the Mayan prophecies that have this idea of this being a great threshold, and you also have this in some of the Vedic material, some of the Vedic tradition, and indeed this idea of the cosmic alignments, to use that term at this time, follow through the Western tradition. So in terms of the Western view, what we have is the solstice, the winter solstice, which is part of our earthly annual cycle, when the sun reaches that dark point, the longest night of the year, and then crosses over and the light returns. So from the earthly cycle, obviously, it's that dark point, that seeding point. But what's so significant at this time, from a Western perspective, is how, with the precession of the equinoxes, we have the sun processed back now slowly across the canopy of stars, the backdrop of stars, to arrive at 5 degrees Sagittarius. And of course, the significance of 5 degrees Sagittarius, sidereally, is that's the heart of the Milky Way. So what we have is this wonderful alignment of the winter solstice sun. So just imagine how it might be to to watch the dawn on this winter solstice coming, and see if the stars are bright enough where one lives, to see it actually ascend through up into the sky and up into the pathway of the Milky Way. So that's when we lived in a very different kind of environment, it would have been all the more challenging and scary to go into winter.
Yes.
So what's so magical then about this time is it's not just the earthly threshold, but it's a much greater threshold that the symbolism is showing us.
Two seemingly different approaches to astrology together.
Yes.
Do you do it in literally like the interpretation with the stricter rules of traditional, and then perhaps a slightly more fluid, humane, I don't know how you would describe psychological?
Contemporary Western astrology, perhaps that's the best definition, contemporary modern Western astrology. Because I studied with the faculty, and their approach is certainly to take a modern approach to astrology, to draw in psychological understanding, but also to be mindful of to be strong on the techniques of astrology. And moving from that, then I was very interested to move more into the traditional astrology because it gave greater structure, greater rigour with the rules, if you like, the container. Now, to weave that back into my natal practice, I'm bringing in some of the more the rigorous approach to, for example, how you would work with aspects. It's a bit of a blend in how I'm actually working with that natally. I made a strong connection with women's spirituality and was very drawn to the images of the goddess and all the rich mythology and understanding that comes through that, and some of the practices, some of the ritual and spiritual practices. I think there was a huge amount happening again 1780s, 90s with exploring counselling and therapy and a psychological approach to astrology in our practice, which has been enormously valuable. But I think part of what wasn't happening at that time was thinking about our practice from a more magical perspective. And so perhaps thinking about how we might be working when we're preparing charts or when we're working with charts in a more ritual way.
All right. And if people want to have a reading with you, where do they go to?
Yes, very welcome to my website. It's www.starpractice.com.
All right. So that's CatCox at starpractice.com. Thank you.
Thank you.